explorers, and welcome to our Explorer Talk. My name is Eileen Galvan from Mexico, and it is a huge pleasure to be your host today. Our guest today is a very special and inspirational woman. So let me introduce you to Astrid. She is founding and director of Zebras Unite, a global community of funders, investors, and allies for a more sustainable, inclusive, collaborative, and ethical way of doing business. In her book, Zebras Fix What Unicorns Break, she generates the possibility for similar companies to truly collaborate and develop financing alternatives that allow them to grow and succeed, but not to grow in the unicorn way, but in the zebra way, to avoid giving priority to quantity to quality, to consumption over creation, access over sustainable development, or the benefit of shareholders over general prosperity. She is also founder and managing partner of Armalaria, a technology and design system companies that creates global, distributed, and democratic infrastructure to activate data, innovation, and capital. Her goal? To solve complex problems that requires complex answers. For example, climate change. You can see their page here in the link and see the different CTGs to see their projects they are involved in. So welcome, Astrid, to this space. How are you today?
Thank you. It's good to be with you. I'm very well. Thank you.
That's great. So before we start, I would like to ask you a couple of questions so we can get into the zone and the audience can get to know a little bit better. Is okay?
Sure thing.
So I'm gonna ask you some quick questions and I would like you to respond with the first idea or sentence that comes to your mind very quick, okay?
Okay.
Great. So where are you from?
Cologne, Germany.
What's your favorite book?
100 Years of Solitude. 100 años de soledad.
Great. And favorite song?
Talking of a Revolution by Tracy Chapman.
What did you study?
I studied economics and philosophy.
Summer or winter?
Oh, that's a hard one. Fall.
Oh, okay. Favorite animal?
Oh, the zebra, of course.
Great. Describe yourself in 3 words.
Tall, curious, and old. In this audience, I'm going to say old.
No, you're not. What's your So tell me, what's your favorite travel destination?
Oh, that's another hard one. I think you're from Mexico, right? I love Mexico City. It's one of my favorite places to go.
Great, I love it. So tell me, coffee or tea?
Coffee.
That's great. Me too. Beach or forest?
Oh, forest.
Forest. Your favorite plan on a Friday night?
My favorite plan on a Friday night these days is going out on a date with my husband because our daughter is now old enough. She likes to socialize with her friends. So he and I have time to go out again. For all of you young parents in the audience, that time comes.
That's awesome. So define a zebra or zebra in 3 words.
Not a unicorn.
That's great. So who is your role model?
Oh, there are so many. It's really, and I don't say this lightly, it's actually every entrepreneur who is trying to solve a problem in the world, be it the immediate world of their community or this big planet that we live on. I'm just so inspired every time I meet someone who is like us, who's trying to solve these problems and using business to do so. I don't have one big hero like that. I think it's all of us working on these things together.
I love that idea, and I think the same way. Zebras entrepreneurs, right?
Yes.
So, great. And what is your favorite color?
Oh, it's blue.
Blue. That's great. Social entrepreneurship or traditional one?
I think many traditional entrepreneurs have always been social entrepreneurs. When you think about my home country of Germany, with our history of family businesses, a lot of traditional entrepreneurs were always solving problems in immediate society. I know these days we distinguish, but to me, most entrepreneurs are social entrepreneurs.
Great, thank you. And finally, what are you most proud of?
What am I most proud of? That's another good one. I think the easy answer is my daughter and having a fabulous child who's unafraid to be in this world, even with all of its challenges. But I'm also very proud of Zebras Unite and how far we have come in the last 5 years. It was just the article that you mentioned. It was written by 4 of us, sort of as a cri de coeur, right? Like as a manifesto about our experience as underserved entrepreneurs, as women entrepreneurs, and to see that resonate so much. That, for example, in November, the mayor of Kobe, Japan, is coming to visit us in Portland, Oregon, because they want to learn more about how to create more zebras in Japan, right? So that's been incredibly humbling, and it makes me a little bit proud that we were able to speak that into the world.
That's great. I read your article and it was amazing and inspirational. And we are all proud of you as well.
Thank you.
So thank you for your response and thank you for letting us know you a little bit better. How do you feel?
I feel great. I have my coffee. I'm ready to go.
That's great. So now I want to invite all the explorers in the chat in Twitch to let all the questions that you want to ask to Astrid, because at the end of this interview, we are going to have like a 10-minute space to respond, okay? So get your questions here, explorers. Now, let's get into the matter. Astrid, I would like to travel in time to 2016 when Zebras Unite was born. Could you tell us the story of how this movement started?
Yeah, sure. And it's funny that you should name 2016 because in many ways that's when it was conceived, when 2 of my co-founders, Mara Zepeda and Jen Brendel, had reconnected as entrepreneurs at a very well-known social entrepreneurship conference called SOCAP in San Francisco, and discovered that their experience as socially minded entrepreneurs was just not resonating with investors. And then Ania and I met those 2 shortly thereafter, and we started comparing our notes. In fact, Jen and Mara had written a very funny article called Sex and Startups that made fun of the unicorn fueled sort of Silicon Valley narrative. And it really resonated with me and Ania. And then the 4 of us got together to write the response to say, because people were pushing back and saying, well, if you don't like unicorns, what is the alternative? Tell us, if not venture capital, what is the alternative? If not the Silicon Valley narrative? And bear in mind at the time, and still to this day, I think a lot of people move to Silicon Valley because they perceive it to be the cradle of entrepreneurship. Like that's where a lot of young entrepreneurs want to go. And then they sleep on couches and they try to get in front of venture capitalists. And so that's what motivated us to write sort of this more positive blog post, Zebras Fix What Unicorns Break, to declare what a zebra is and to say, there's a different way to be an entrepreneur, to be motivated by money, to be motivated by big aspirations, to want to solve big problems. And you don't have to do it using venture capital. And then honestly, we were surprised. We were just surprised by how many people that message resonated with. And from all over the world, like our email inboxes just blew up. So that piece got published in February of 2017. And then our inboxes just exploded. And we said, oh dear, we have created a monster. Like this, now people want to know where they can go and explore what it means to be a zebra. And so we initially invited everybody to Portland, Oregon. Not everybody, we invited 250 people that represented the response we were getting to Portland, Oregon, to basically figure out what needed to exist. Like what could we offer? that didn't exist. And very quickly, we landed on the three C's. Obviously, we need a different form of capital. People were hungry for a very different form of startup community. And then we just holistically needed a different culture, like a different startup culture. And then we set about creating sort of the institutional container for Zebos Unite to exist beyond the page of a blog post and in the real world. And that took us a few years to really get off the ground. And here we are 5 years later with a global cooperative, chapters in 40 cities and a nonprofit sidecar. So we are organized as a hybrid enterprise that is both for-profit and nonprofit, and tens of thousands of people who are in our social networks.
That's amazing. And it is curious because when we think about an entrepreneur, we used to imagine this Silicon Valley stereotype of a strong man in suits, raising capital in very technological projects, but zebras could represent another type of entrepreneurs, the social ones that want to create a huge impact, and it's very, very inspiring. So I would like to ask you about this impact entrepreneurship. How, what was your biggest challenge that you faced as a social entrepreneur?
Yeah, and that leads directly to my my own experience of why I became an entrepreneur and why I think of myself as a zebra, right? Like in your question, like three words that describe me, I said old because I'm a Gen Xer, right? I'm turning 51 this year. And I became an entrepreneur later in life, right? Like I became an entrepreneur in my 40s after a 15 or so year career in an environmental nonprofit organization. And the company that I founded and that now is called Armillaria came directly out of my very deep experience, decades long, in the impact or the social change industry, right? And we're actually trying to solve for some problems that I perceived in an industry that I had been working in. And that is a story that a lot of entrepreneurs share, right? Like it's your lived experience that informs the kind of company you're building and the problem you're trying to solve. And so then when you go out and try to raise money against that, it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit the sort of traditional Silicon Valley style thinking about what kind of company should exist in the world, what kind of products and services should exist. And I sometimes joke, impact investors don't understand technology, and the tech investors didn't understand impact. And then plus, when I showed up, to investor meetings, they would say things like, "Don't you think you're paying yourself too much?" And I said, I'm a senior executive in my 40s. I have a family. Like I don't fit the model of the lone wolf, pre-unicorn. That's a no, we're mixing metaphors, right? Like the solo entrepreneur in Silicon Valley who's sleeping on the couch and eating ramen noodles at 25. There's nothing wrong with 25-year-olds. It just didn't fit this model of entrepreneurship that is actually informed by deep experience, right? And so that was a very, very big problem, that the experience of the vast majority of entrepreneurs just doesn't fit into the narrow definitions of Silicon Valley.
Yes, that's very interesting because that goes into my next question. You mentioned how hard was to raise investment for impact projects. So here in Explorer, we have a lot of new social entrepreneurs that eventually will need to raise investment to or contact suppliers or something. So what could you recommend to them in that cases?
Don't give up. Be very, very patient, and also understand um, understand what you're up against, right? Because even the people who call themselves impact investors have a venture capital mindset. And so this is really a surprise, right? Because you think you're doing something really good for the world, whatever it might be, whatever sector you might be in, last mile health solutions, conservation solutions, poverty, whatever you're working on, right? Fintech to alleviate poverty. and you think people should be excited about your venture because of the problem you're solving, but then you realize, and maybe they should be happy with a slower rate of return, a smaller rate of return, right? Because if you're working in those markets, if you're working in those spaces, you will have a longer valley of death, as it's sometimes called, right? Like finding product market fit in social entrepreneurship is really difficult. It takes a lot of experimentation. It takes a lot of work in the field, on the ground, with the communities you're designing with and for. But then you realize the investors don't share that mindset. The investors, even impact investors, have a very, very traditional venture capital outlook. And so that's part of what we're up against in Zebras Unite. We said it doesn't help to call yourself an impact entrepreneur or social entrepreneur if the impact investors and the social investors still, I mean, they want impact unicorns, right? Like that's what they're talking about now. And that's not a realistic expectation. So understand what you're up against, that even people who call themselves impact investors 9 out of 10 times will have a venture capital mindset. And that is a very, very painful lesson to learn. So if I can do one thing today, is help you prepare for that pain of realization that even impact investors will judge you by your ability to create a unicorn. And we are working very hard at Zebras Unite to change that mindset, right? Like that's that culture shift I was talking about. Because as an individual entrepreneur, you really don't have the time to educate every investor, right? Ideally, you just want to find the investors that are right for you. And so that's why in one way, we think of Zebras Unite as a trade association for impact entrepreneurs, right? To basically advance your interests with investors so that they are a little bit more ready when you come knocking on their door.
That's great. And it's very interesting because in Zebras Unite, you are changing the way, the perception of how we're doing business and raising money because there are not enough impact investors because of the way of thinking. And you are changing that. And it's awesome. And now I would like to ask you a little bit more about all the new entrepreneurs that are starting his own journey. What would you recommend to the entrepreneurs that are already starting, like from zero?
Well, congratulations. You're already braver than 99% of people. So I think actually entrepreneurship is a great way to be in the world and make an impact and also to create wealth for yourself, your family, your community. So I think it's a brave thing to do. I think the two pieces of advice I would have is um, one is don't assume that because something is new to you, it is new to the world, right? So we see a lot of entrepreneurship that is just repeating what already exists. And that is particularly rampant in social entrepreneurship, right? So for example, one of my favorite examples of an innovation that has been repeated time and time again is a water ATM. Right? Like it's a way of delivering clean water in the slums and shantytowns and low-income neighborhoods all over the world. That thing has now been invented 15 times and reinvented, right? With slightly different business models, right? But it's basically the same thing over and over again. And there's a company in India that actually runs it as a franchise. So I always say it's like make sure that you have done your homework and your market research and that you understand who's already out there in the world. Because in social enterprise, it really doesn't help to come up with a competing water ATM and try to say somehow it's better, it's more magical, it's the silver bullet. It will be the unicorn. The other 15 just didn't know how. That's not helpful. Like when you're actually driven by the problem you're solving, your entrepreneurship may be better deployed trying to figure out how to make something that already exists better, right? So that's my one piece of advice is, first piece of advice is, don't try to tell yourself that you have to solve something completely new. Think about how you might be able to make something existing better and also make sure that you've actually understood what's already out there. And my second piece of advice is it's really revenue. Like figure out how you can sell your product, your service, or initially your expertise, right? And that is a very big theme across Zebras Unite globally, is how can we help entrepreneurs create revenue-based financing strategies, right? Where you basically, you make money and reinvest it into your company. And that is initially potentially slower growth, but it's actually the right focus, right? It actually helps you, it relentlessly forces you to test your product in the marketplace, because if nobody's willing to pay for it, like, you're not solving a problem. And sometimes we forget that, like we forget with a lot of venture funded companies, that became unicorns, but they also became unicorns at the expense of society, right? Like Facebook didn't become profitable until they figured out how to sell our attention to marketers. That's a problem. Like if Facebook had been forced to be profitable earlier, maybe it wouldn't exist in the form it exists today. And frankly, our democracies would probably be better off, right? So I think that discipline of selling and making revenue has a number of beneficial side effects, both for your personal business, for the business you're starting, but also, frankly, for the world.
That's amazing. And it's very interesting what you mentioned before. Sometimes entrepreneurs are looking to sell a specific solution that doesn't solve the problem at all. So it's not valuable enough to someone to pay for it. And doing our research is highly important to assure that we have a market space and make this happen. No? That's why we always hear here in Exploring and some spaces like this that we need to fall in love with the problem, not with the solution that we are trying to sell, right?
Yeah.
So it's very interesting.
I love that expression, by the way, falling in love with the problem. That's exactly it.
Exactly, yeah. It's talking about social entrepreneurship and like
and also, I mean, if we're naming bumper stickers or T-shirts, right? Like fall in love with the problem, and the other one is fall in love with your sales process, right? Like as an entrepreneur, you have a finite number of hours in the day, and you can spend them either chasing investors or chasing customers. So if you're going to chase somebody, chase your paying customers, right?
yes, at the end of the day, we can live without money and without customers. So it is very important to have those spaces taking care of what we're doing, right? So in that, talking about raise a startup as a zebra startup, I would like to ask you which are the main benefits of that.
So, I mean, the benefit of and first of all, the Zebra startup, it doesn't exist as a corporate form, right? It's not like, oh, here's how you incorporate as a Zebra. It's really the combination of how you structure your company, what kind of things you make in the first place, what you're trying to sell in the first place, how you create value for your customers and your community. It's a mindset, right? But it has a number of interesting effects, and one of the important ones that I like to emphasize with founders is you maintain control of your company, right? It's such a simple thing, but if you bring on investors, especially venture style investors, they're going to take a piece of your company, and every subsequent financing round, you lose more control until you're in the C or D or E round, and now you've lost control. And time again, we see what happens to those companies, right? The founders get kicked out, the focus shifts in a way that they never intended. And so, like, the biggest advantage to operating a company through this sort of zebra mentality is that you maintain control of your vision.
That's great. And I know that you already mentioned something before, but I want to go further into that topic. Why is so important to apply ethics into business?
Well, is that not obvious? Business can do incredible harm, right? I mean, we talked about the example of Facebook, right? So if you don't design your product or service intentionally, it can do incredible harm, right? And so, I mean, I sometimes think of it as sort of a version of a Hippocratic oath, but for business, right? Like, do no harm. And I know Google likes to say that, but that's not in fact what happens, right? So I think being very serious and intentional about how like what you're building in the first place, how you're building it, how you're involving the community. And I think social entrepreneurs in particular have to be very, very thoughtful about how they're working with communities, maybe in emerging markets, right? Or people who have less education, right? So you have to be really mindful as an entrepreneur about how you do your product design, for example, right? Or how you show up in a community that may not be your own home community. And so I think that's where, I would hate for there to be unethical social entrepreneurs. I mean, that seems like a terrible thing to have. So I think that's the importance of ethics, is you have a responsibility to the people and the planet you serve.
Yes, of course. And sometimes it's hard to imagine, like, we as entrepreneurs, the amount of power that we have in our hands. But we have it. So why not we build social entrepreneurs and make an impact with that? It's just to combine the traditional way of entrepreneurship, but with an impact one. And we have the power to do so. And it's very, very inspirational. So talking about a little bit more about the business model. I am pretty curious about how does your business model works at Zebras Unite? Like how you monetize, how is this process? Could you tell me a little bit more about it, please?
Yeah, so you're right. I mean, Zebras Unite itself is essentially a gigantic social enterprise, right? And so we're sort of exhibit A, and how to be a zebra is look under the hood of Zebras Unite. And we're very much committed to documenting everything we do very transparently. And so we're working on a whole knowledge library of how we did what we did and how that works. And then we share that knowledge with others. But at the heart of it, it's a multi-stakeholder cooperative, and so people pay to initially buy a share in the co-op, and then they pay an annual membership fee. And then that's the co-op side, and then we can monetize. We make money for the co-op through a number of things. For example, through advisory services. So we actually we have a lot of interest in from public agencies and from other initiatives and from foundations, from the nonprofit world, basically how to spread this, how to create more impactful entrepreneur ecosystems. And so we're able to basically provide consulting services. And we do that by members, like actually taking co-op members in those markets with a little bit of oversight from headquarters, if you will, who then deliver these advisory services, and the co-op takes a margin. So that's one business line. Another business line is education and experiences. Like this summer, we had a course that people could pay as individual entrepreneurs to take, and there were 6 or 7 sessions, sort of like how to be a zebra entrepreneur, right? As a course. That's another line of a business. And then the third line of business that I'm responsible for as the head of Zebras Unite Capital is, when we say we need new capital, what we mean is we're going to have to create it ourselves, right? So we're actually in the business of creating new capital mechanisms and financing mechanisms that then Zebras Unite, the co-op, can participate financially in, right? So long story short, we get paid to manage capital in this way that we have defined. And then, so those are some of the main buckets of how we make money as a co-op, and then we can share that with our members. Another thing we do, another membership benefit, is the co-op can negotiate special deals, right, with strategic partners. So, for example, we have partnerships with a number of crowd investing platforms, like WeFunder here in the United States, and our members get a break in the transaction costs. So if you come and you're a Zebras Unite member, instead of paying 7.5% transaction fees on WeFunder, we only pay 6.5%. So that's what sets up sort of this mechanism of like why it's valuable to join the co-op, which then generates membership fees, and you get the drift, right? And then separately, so that's the for-profit cooperative, and then we have a non-profit sidecar where we're able to attract grant funding to do sort of the larger work of spreading the word and sort of doing the public education, right? Like doing a lot of the work, the advocacy work, if you will, to help more of this kind of entrepreneurship, emerge around the world. And so we have basically a diversified revenue base. We ourselves are revenue funded, so we're walking our talk, right? You cannot be a venture investor and invest in Zebras Unite. We have an investor shareholder class, but they don't have voting power on our board. So we have separated the financial investment from the governance, and that's again back to like, what's the advantage? It means we, the owner members of Zebras Unite, maintain the control.
Oh my God, it was a long journey, but it is amazing. Congratulations. That is a high evidence that Zebras, a type of enterprise, can do it in the market and can rock it and grow. And congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah.
So Astrid, thank you so much for sharing your story and experience today. Um, Personally, I was really inspirational about how you grow and what you create. So congratulations from the bottom of my heart. Now it's moment to solve the questions that we have in the chat box before we continue with the private session with the explorers that want the dynamic. So there are some questions here in the chat of Twitch. Are you ready?
Absolutely. Fire away.
Okay. So first of all, Divinus asks, what do you think has been the most difficult thing to undertake?
What has been the most difficult thing to undertake for Zebras Unite?
Yes, I think so.
Well, let me actually answer this in a number of different ways. I think, and I don't know, because of my age, I'm not sure how reflective this experience is for the rest of the audience. But for me, one of the most difficult things was actually to decide to become an entrepreneur. And as women in particular, we're so conditioned to fit in. And yes, you make a good living, but typically you make that good living by working for somebody else, right? And then there are additional pressures to be typically more focused on the family, right? And so it was really interesting when I decided to become an entrepreneur to realize how much of that was actually deeply embodied and how much of that I had internalized. So I had to give myself permission to become an entrepreneur. And I think with the new generations, I think that's less of an issue. I certainly look at my daughter and I look at other young women and I go, that's hopefully a lesser problem for you all. But that was definitely in my personal experience. That was an interesting milestone. And then, for Zebras Unite, I think, well, for my own business, the most difficult thing to undertake is actually on a daily basis. It's sort of unlearning business 101. It is unlearning the unicorn mentality and building a different kind of business, like every day, with every decision we take, every customer we serve. Like you have to, it's sort of a daily unlearning, which again, if you're a brand new entrepreneur and you're in your 20s, you have not had a chance to learn bad habits. So again, you have an advantage over me. But that's like a daily practice. Like you have to actively unlearn some of the old ways of doing business and running startups. And then finally, thirdly, at the level of Zebras Unite, I think the undertaking, the biggest challenge we have is that it is global and it wants to be everywhere all at once at the same time, which I also realize is, I think, a recent movie. But like that whole, like everything everywhere all at once is it's challenging. It's both exhilarating, but it's very difficult at the same time, in a good way.
Yes, that's amazing. So someone in the chat wants to talk about failure. Here is a question. Osborne asks, what was the biggest mistake you made as an entrepreneur?
So speaking for my company, Amalaria, the biggest mistake it's an interesting one, right? Because as an entrepreneur, you're a visionary and you're used to standing in the future. And I think the biggest mistake is that I made was to think that the market was ready for us when it wasn't ready for us yet. And it's an interesting failure, right? Because it's a failure in yourself that you have to balance. Like you have to balance the can do, and I have a vision, and I have an inkling about what the right thing is, with like you want to believe that people are ready to buy your product or service, right? But then how do you navigate, like how do you balance that with, well, the market is just not ready, right? So I think if you had to reduce it to a statement, you would say we failed to find product market fit. In our case, it wasn't so much of a problem because it meant, well, let's try something different. Right. So we're actually at my company, we pivoted. Like we took that failure of not finding product market fit when we thought we should, and said, okay, let's understand our customers, let's understand the market better. And so we spent the last 4 or 5 years in consulting, right? Which everybody in Silicon Valley tells you is a terrible idea. Well, for us, it was a great idea because, it paid us, right? It made money for the company. And we now understand the market much better. And also the market has caught up to what we have to offer. And so we're actually about to relaunch our product. And so then we'll see, right? Like, was it a failure or was it a detour? But that moment of like not reading the market around you, and the biggest mistake I think you can make is not reacting to what you're hearing quickly enough.
It's amazing. I like the way you talk about failure, because failure is always uh, a first step of grow or evolve. So we need to fail if we want to grow, evolve eventually. And it's amazing how you manage a thing and you evolve until what Zebras Unite is nowadays. So congratulations. We have
Yeah, and I'm sorry, that example was from my own company. With Zebras Unite,
oh,
I think so. That was speaking for Amalaria. On the Zebras Unite side, I think what's the biggest mistake we made there? That's a good question. Um I think the biggest mistake there is, and we pulled it back really quickly. Like we started out this year thinking we really wanted to drive membership as a lean into paid membership in the co-op as a revenue driver. And then we realized, wait, that's a mistake until we have a more compelling offering, right? So anybody can come to Zebras Unite and just absorb all the free stuff that we can produce on the nonprofit side of the house. But for the co-op to work as a co-op, right? Like people have to derive value from it. And so, you don't just want to push people into membership and then they go, well, there's nothing here for me. And so the mistake was one internal one of saying, oh, we think membership could be a big revenue driver this year. And then we realized, no, actually it can't until we have a more interesting set of perks that you get as a member, or access to capital that you get as a member, or whatever, right? And now that we have built that up, I think we're actually much more ready to lean into membership, which is a very powerful way of self-funding a co-op next year.
that's amazing. Interesting, because in every business have this type of stories that eventually make us grow and be what we are now in the market. So congratulations. We have another question from Jota Guerrero. He says, do you have a moment of all of nothing creating the Zebra project? I mean, well, he means any critical decision that could affect so much the project?
I'm sorry, you just cut out at the very beginning of that question. Could you please repeat that?
Yes. Did you have a moment of all or nothing?
With Zebras Unite?
Yes.
Several. I mean, look, when we wrote the article in 2017, right, it was just the four of us processing what we thought should exist. Like we were basically describing what we wanted, and then we had published on Medium, and it went out in the world. That was sort of an all or nothing. Like we didn't know what would happen, right? And then, of course, the response came in, but we had no way of responding to everyone, right? And so the first thing we did was, I guess you could call it sort of a market test, right? Like we called everybody we knew and said, would you sponsor a gathering? Like if we brought 250 people together, would you actually give us money to bring everybody together? Because the four of us couldn't afford to just throw a 3-day party for everyone here. So I think there were a number of those. That was a big one. And then there was a moment when the four of us looked at each other and said, huh, do we really want to create this thing together? Because it's we knew it was going to be very difficult and hard work. And bear in mind, all four of us have our own companies or had our own companies at the same time, right? So to say, like, can you figure out a way to grow your company and grow the movement? Oh, by the way, the movement is also held by a company, right? Like it's a classic thing that people tell you. It's like you have to be laser focused as an entrepreneur. It's like, well, sorry, I'm building my business and I'm building this global movement. And it just needs to be both and, right? And so we each had that personal moment of all or nothing, like, oh, am I able to do this? Right? Can I really lean into this thing? And then there were some other moments that were much easier, right? Like we had one potential investor who said, how can I invest in zebras? But when it came down to actually talking terms, I mean, would I love it if somebody gave us $5 million just as an investor and let us do with it what we need to do to scale the movement? Sure. But when it came down to it, it was like it was the same phenomenon of the impact investor all over again. I had to explain to him in relationship what we're doing in relationship to a Delaware C company, which is the predominant corporate form here in the US that all the venture capitalists invest in. And I said, it's just not right for you. Like if I have to fit the zebra into your unicorn template, it's an easy nothing. Like it's like, would I love your investment? Sure, but it's like it's not going to be a good fit. So some of the all or nothings are really easy decisions.
That's great. Thank you so much. So we have our last question, last but not least, and it belongs to NBP. And she says, how to deal with imposter syndrome. Can you give us tips for dealing with this?
Ah, the good old imposter syndrome.
Mhm.
Um, you know, all the tricks that you hear about they actually work, right? Sort of taking a deep breath, like breathing exercises, really helpful before you go into a room. Finding peers that you can talk with is really, really important. And one of the things that we have observed in the zebra community is that you get entrepreneurs on like in completely different parts of the world finding each other to talk to each other about what it feels like to solve that problem, but in their respective parts of the world. And that can be really, really powerful to find somebody who thinks like you, who's working on something similar, but they're half a world away. So they're not going to be your immediate competitor, right? But they're your peer. That's really very helpful. And then, there is a dose of uh, humility. Like you do want to make sure that you do know what you're talking about, and you want to make sure that you have done a little bit of research, right? So when the imposter syndrome pops up and the self-talk starts, you can tell yourself, oh no, Astrid, you've thought about this. You have looked for evidence that you're wrong. You're not wrong. It may feel that way, but you're still not wrong. so so I think those are some strategies that I've certainly used and that I've seen other people use with effect.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for all the experience and stories and tips that you share with us today. It was a huge pleasure to be with you. So it's moment to say thank you to the audience because it's time to go with those explorers that want a dynamic to our private session with Astrid. So Astrid, thank you so much for your time for share this space with us. Any other thing that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, it was a pleasure to be with you all on Twitch, a platform I'm not on very often. So I'm told it's where all the cool kids hang out. And please feel free to take a look at zebusunite.com or .coop and learn more about what we're up about. And if you don't have a chapter yet in where you live, we would love for you to make one.
Thank you so much. So guys, girls, you know how to create a zebra enterprise now. So thank you so much for your time to hear us, and see you later. Thank you. Bye.
See you all later.